Mobilize Recovery is celebrating the launch of National Recovery Month in Maine with an event in Augusta. Over 100 people in recovery and their allies were at the event that was held at the Governor Hill Mansion. Courtney Garrett Allen is the organizing director with the Maine Recovery Advocacy Project. She says the event was about education and hope for those struggling with substance use disorder. From media training to legislative advocacy, Garrett Allen says people can not only recover, but they can have a voice too.
8 years ago, when I entered long-term recovery, somebody taught me that I had a voice and that I could be a part of the public process. And today, that is what this day is really about, is teaching people in recovery that their voices matter and that they can and should engage in the legislative process. You know, we're not actually advocating for any particular piece of legislation today. Today, we're really teaching those concrete organizing skills and empowering people in recovery to show up and use their voices.
We want to make a difference, but we can't do it without more people behind us. So anytime we can do something like this and bring people together, because the opposite of addiction is connection, and we're doing it.
Maine General was at the event providing resources and free HIV tests.